Okay. Good morning. It's Monday, October the 5th, 2020. The time is now 9:02. We are here for a board workshop. Ms. Fisher will be in shortly. We have Ms. Vaughn on the phone. Are you there, Ms. Vaughn?
I'm here.
And the other members will be joining us, I presume, shortly. So the business today is the purpose for the workshop is for the construction audit. RSM will be here to discuss that with us. And then we'll move on to the dashboard review and followed by good of the order and the adjournment. Oh, I'm sorry, the Audit Committee as well. So that's what our day is going to be like. So we're going to begin with the workshop and construction audit. And if we could have the presenters, please introduce yourself when you come up, and they will be coming up to which side? This side? Good morning.
Good morning.
They'll turn you on in a minute.
Oh, okay. Okay. And Matthew, are you on the line?
Yes, hello, I'm on the phone.
Perfect. So we're here to present the facility construction internal audit report. You all had received this a few months ago. Hopefully you've had some fun summer reading with this. The objective of this internal audit was to assess the design and effectiveness of the internal control structure as it relates to facility construction and whether system of controls is adequate and appropriate for promoting and encouraging the achievement of management's objectives. Matthew Blondell, as you all have met before, he is our subject matter professional when it comes to facilities construction, so he will be presenting this report to you. And I believe we had also asked members from management to be here in case you all had any questions as well.
And he's here.
There he is. Matthew, I'll turn it over to you.
All righty. So the report, we'll just walk through it page by page, and if you have any questions, I can certainly answer them at the end, or you can feel free to stop me in the middle, and I'm happy to answer them as we go. So beyond the cover sheet, you have page 1, which is our transmittal letter, and it just provides a brief overview of the layout of the report. And then on page 2 is where it really starts with the executive summary. On this, yes?
Please
Hello?
have them, just a second, they're having a hard time hearing you, so we're going to have it be turned up, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. Would you like to go ahead and try it again, please?
Yes. Is this any better?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Okay. So on page 1, it's the transmittal letter, just provides a brief overview of the layout of the report. And on page 2 is where the information really starts with the executive summary. The top left includes a brief background of the facility development and programming department that is responsible for the planning, executing, coordinating of capital projects. And that is really, they were really the subject of this internal audit. And again, just to provide some context, in the last 2 years, there were about 16 projects completed, and as of when we wrote this report in May, 6 projects were either in process or in the closeout process, which included 2 new school construction projects. As Clara mentioned, the objective of the audit was to assess the design and effectiveness of the internal control structure as it related to the facility construction process. And to do that, we really had 3 major components. The first was where we conducted detailed walkthroughs of the key processes with the facility development and programming, as well as some procurement personnel, to identify the key controls within the process and assess their design. And then we did some testing of source documents from the procurement process, invoice process, change orders, vendor performance monitoring, and closeout for projects to test to make sure that the controls that were relayed to us as in place were actually working and operating. And then from there, we discussed with management and developed some recommendations based on the observations that we identified. So towards the bottom of page 2, we have the overall summary of highlights where we did want to make note that, we really feel that the control environment is in place with is in alignment with common industry practice, and that there are several checklists and review procedures that we really like to see, and we typically recommend that were already in place within the facility development and programming and capital construction process. We do understand that there was, within the past couple of years, there's been some turnover in that department, and that some new processes have been implemented, and we feel that those are some great processes with those checklists, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. And then that's the last paragraph. Yes?
Follow you.
Madam Chair, it's attached. It should be attached in board docs.
Oh, thank you. Did you get that one? Thank you. I apologize.
Sure. We also wanted the second paragraph in the overall summary, we wanted to just point out that the observations that we write in an internal audit report really only focus on the instances where an exception was noted and do not detail the instances where our testing did not reveal any reportable observations. I think that's just an important, as we present this as our first report, it's an important thing to distinguish and let the board know that, when we talk through these, this is really highlighting the things where we've noted the observations and not necessarily where the testing didn't reveal any observations. So speaking of that, moving on to page 3, we do have an executive summary of the observations as well as some of the process improvement opportunities. I'll briefly touch on them here, but the later pages have much more detail. The first observation related to documentation that was attached and maintained related to the support of construction invoices. The second observation related to maintaining records to support the reasonableness of certain negotiated components within the construction contract, either through a fixed cost component or through a rate that was established. And then the third observation related to the composition of the selection committee, and for one of our samples, we saw that the selection committee did not have an optimal mix of members from various departments. And then the process improvement opportunities that we noted, which are separate from the observations, and that they're really just provided for management's consideration and don't require a management response, because it wasn't that we noticed that anything was wrong per se or that something didn't happen that should have. It was more just that it was something that we noted that could be an improvement to the process. The first one was related to program and project management software. In our walkthroughs and our testing, we saw that everything is really in hard copy form, and that we know that there are several software companies out there that offer some products that can help streamline the process and document management, as well as some workflows that relate to all the processes within our scope. So invoice review, change order review, closeout documentation. There are some really great softwares out there that can provide the district with some efficiency gains and some really great tools to help facilitate the management of these processes. And then on the second process improvement opportunity, it's related to tying the vendor monitoring that's already going on in with the procurement. So on certain smaller projects, which we call CC&A projects or continuing contracts, right now the district uses a rotational award where there's just a list of contractors and the next one on the list gets the next project on the list. And there is some vendor monitoring that's being done by the construction department, and we just wanted to see where they were tying that vendor monitoring into how they selected the next vendor, as opposed to just going the next on the list. So there's a little bit more there that we'll talk about as we get to that in the later pages. Page 4 and the next several pages is the background section, and this provides some of the key processes that are performed by the facility development and programming as well as procurement. And we include this in our reports to provide the reader, the board, with context and narrative that explains what the entire process entails. For example, as I will refer to it later as an invoice review, it's more than just a quick glance at a single sheet of paper, and rather it's really a process that involves an entire team of employees and vendors that are all working together, and that process might take several days to complete. And so the background section provides some of the narrative there that explains that to provide context to the observations and some of the language that we'll use throughout the report. So on page 4, we have a narrative explaining the composition of the department as well as an org chart to show that, it reports up to the operations division, and there are facility engineers and an accountant that report to the director of construction project management, which reports up to the executive director of facility development and programming. When we wrote the report in May, there were 6 projects that were either in progress or in closeout, which we have listed below in that table there on the bottom. And then moving on to page 5, we had provided just a recent history of the projects that had been completed in the past 2 years. Again, just to provide some context to the work that the department is responsible for overseeing. The bottom of page 5 provides a brief description, and it's built onto page 6 of the construction manager at risk contract. And I think that's an important terminology to note here. There are several different ways to contract with a vendor to provide or perform construction services, and the construction manager at risk is the one that the district primarily uses. And the way that that's set up is it's really meant to provide construction where at actual cost plus, a negotiated fee or a percentage of fee as a profit, so that it's really a transparent way to provide the district with the full budget of exactly what it costs to build a project, with a fee for the construction manager at the end. And while it does create a great transparent contract, it does require some good oversight, because there are some complex areas when we're talking about ascertaining actual costs when it comes to labor, work performed by related parties, and insurance and things like that. So it does require some good oversight. And then as we get onto the bottom half of page 6, we start to talk about the procurement process, and the rest of the pages are really going to follow, the life cycle of a project. So procurement, although it used to be performed for construction projects, used to be performed in-house by the Facility Development and Programming Department, within the past couple of years, the procurement function was centralized into the Procurement Services Department. But even though it's been centralized and it's moved to where the facilitation of procurement is really managed by procurement, Facilities Development and Programming is still involved in the process to provide technical, construction-specific expertise in key areas like in the scope creation and in the scoring and ranking of respondents. So the chevron chart there just provides a brief overview of the process where the scope is created, and then in conjunction with Facilities Development and Programming, and then that's used to create the RFQ, and then that's issued, and then procurement receives the submittals, and then a selection committee comes together to review the submittals and create a short list. Then there are interviews and presentations that are performed, then another evaluation, and then ultimately that results in a contract being brought to the board for approval. On page 7, it explains some of those criteria that are used in the selection of the vendor as well as the selection committee. And we did have, the selection committee there in the middle, we did have an observation related to this, which we'll touch on, I think, number 3. But really it's between 5 and 12 members from the district personnel who come together and rate and rank the vendors as they respond, as well as their presentations that they give during the shortlist process. So for smaller projects at the bottom of page 7, these are continuing services contracts. And this would be prior for a cap of $2 million. This is dictated by statute. The district would utilize continuing services contracts. And what that means is that an RFQ is released, and it's a qualifications-based selection where several contractors are approved and selected, and without assignment to specific projects. And then there are projects that are on the capital plan, and as the projects come up, the vendors that were previously approved and currently under contract are then awarded those next projects just on a going down the list kind of basis. I say $2 million was the previous cap. legislation has recently passed that increased that cap to $4 million. Moving on to page 8, we talk about the invoice process. This is what I alluded to earlier, where it's really a process that's managed and has several owners throughout it at different phases. And this is explaining what happens each month when a contractor is submitting an invoice related to the work that they've completed in the prior month on the project. So this provides that detail. Basically, the contractor submits a draft invoice to the project team on the site. The whole project team, which includes the architect and the facility engineer, which is the project manager for the district, will walk through the site and review the invoice together. Then they'll meet, and then they'll talk about changes that might need to be made to the invoice. Then it's kicked back to the contractor, who will make those changes and then resubmit. And then it goes through the approval of the architect, and then the facility engineer, and then the accountant. And then ultimately the director of construction project management will approve it. And then once all of those approvals are in place and any updates to the invoice that are required have been made by the contractor, it's then submitted to accounts payable for processing. And to facilitate that process, as we lay out on page 9, there is a checklist that's used that includes 18 steps and 5 administrative procedures related to just, again, the facilitation of all of those reviews of that invoice, of each invoice. Then on page 9 at the bottom, we talk about the change order process, which follows a similar flow where the construction manager is proposing a change, which is submitted and reviewed by the architect, by the facility engineer or the district's project manager, as well as the accountant to review for the details of mathematical accuracy and supporting documentation, again, and then up to the director of construction project management. And then if it's increasing the budget for the GMP, it would then be approved by the superintendent. On page 10, we note that, again, there's a change order checklist that's used to facilitate and guide the reviewers through the process. But I also wanted to point out that there are, change orders are often seen as bad, right, because they might add things, but they can also bring some good. The district does have a direct materials purchase and tax savings program where the district can take advantage of its tax-exempt status to reduce certain costs by procuring materials. The district can directly procure the materials, which then would reduce the contract value by the material amount plus the tax amount. So that's where the district would realize the savings in the tax. Towards the bottom of page 10, we talk about the vendor performance monitoring, and then it moves on to page 11, where at the completion of the project, the project manager will complete the construction manager evaluation form, which has 18 performance measures, and where they're going to rank each of those on a scale of 1 to 4. And then as we move into closeout, there are several components like obtaining the certificate of final completion and final inspection and the certificate of occupancy that are critical to maintaining those sort of records in facility, and as well as the checklist is used for that for the final project closeout. So that concludes the background section and just provides, again, some context to the entire process and some additional information for the reader to really understand everything that's going on when we're talking about a specific process like an invoice review, what that really means. Page 12 is our objectives and approach, and it's in more detail. So the first phase was to understand the process. To do this, we conducted an entrance conference with executive management, as well as many of the facility engineers, the project managers, to understand their department and to get an understanding of who is in the department, how it's managed, and how they approach projects. And then from there, we conducted interviews and walkthroughs of each of the processes that we noted above to obtain an understanding and to document the controls that are specific within those processes, so that we could then turn that into a testing plan to test the controls that and the processes that were explained to us. So then from there, We move into the testing phase where we evaluate the design of the process to see if there's any gaps that we note based on comparable experience and benchmarking. And then we actually selected a sample of projects and conducted detailed testing of procurement packages, invoices, change orders, direct materials purchases for those tax savings, closeout packages, and vendor monitoring and evaluation forms to validate that they occurred and happened as they were explained to us. And then we met with management, which included the facility development and programming group, as well as the superintendent, and to vet the findings and to obtain management responses to the observations prior to presenting, or sending and then now presenting the report to the board. So moving on to page 13, we get into the observations, and these are laid out in an observation description, and then that's followed by a recommendation, which is made by RSM, as well as management's action plan, which is really their response and what they intend to do to address the recommendation that we have provided here. So the first observation relates to the pay application support and record retention. In our testing, we noted some inconsistency in the level of documentation that was readily available to support amounts that were invoiced by the contractors. We have 4 bullets here of the things that we noted during our testing. For one project, there were several invoices that did not include the supporting documents to support the labor costs that were invoiced. And then there was, in another project, there was a pay application where a Wi-Fi device was billed as an allocation rather than at the actual cost. And those were related to general conditions. We also had 2 of the bullets here that related to subcontractor costs, where for one of the invoices that we reviewed, we saw that a subcontractor cost was supported as an email from the contractor rather than an invoice from that subcontractor. And then we also saw that there was one instance where retainage was not withheld from the prime contractor, but was withheld from the subcontractor, where we understand that if the prime contractor wasn't withholding retainage from their bill, they should not have withheld it from the subcontractor. I did want to note that in most of the cases above, there were records that were subsequently obtained by the district from the contractors to support the costs, but the finding here really relates to the fact that they weren't included in the pay application package that was considered the final pay application package that was provided to us as it was maintained in the records. And so, as we talked about before with the construction manager at risk contract, it's really meant to be, actual cost plus a fee. And so, to validate invoices that come in, the actual cost to be supported, what we would typically expect to see is subcontractor invoices, lien releases, labor records from the prime contractor showing their folks that were working on the project, the hours that they worked, and so forth and so on, to support the actual cost that was incurred, and then there's a calculation to come to the fee for that particular month. And the district's contracts really require, the language as we saw it really require that full packet of supporting documentation. Moving on to page 14, we did see that this risk is somewhat mitigated by a later control that happens where a third party conducts an audit at the conclusion of a construction where it's in excess of $2 million. And there are some limited procedures that are performed by the district's in-house internal audit department for those smaller projects between $200 and $2 million. But since these audits are occurring at the project completion, it can be difficult to recover if something is billed out of accordance with the contract and it's not picked up during the invoice process, which is in real time. If it's caught at the end, it can be a little bit more difficult to recover costs if that is indeed what would need to happen. And so the recommendation here is to beef up the review process happening at the invoice review in real time to make sure that things aren't missed later on, so that the district wouldn't have to be in a litigation position to be asking for money back if something was billed that wasn't in accordance with the contract. Management's action plan they noted that they intended to, as we had recommended, include an extra step in the checklist to validate that all of the information is going to be collected, and that they have already started doing that process, and making sure that there is a detailed review of each invoice and every component has a full cost support before they approve the invoice. Page 15 starts observation number 2, which relates to the negotiation of certain components as either fixed costs or at certain rates. During our testing and in some conversations with management, we saw that the district sometimes negotiates to treat certain items as lump sum or to establish certain rates within the agreement. And even though they're negotiated, we didn't see that there was a record maintained of how the district was comfortable in that negotiation with saying these are appropriate rates, and as well as modifying contract language to reflect that. So specifically, if we were talking about labor rates for the construction manager employees, insurance rates for different types of insurance, and bond rates, as well as a rate that was charged per month for use of construction contractor software. So again, going back to the construction manager at risk agreement, the templates contain provisions that required full support for all items within the budget. And even though fixing or agreeing to certain rates can reduce administrative burden, that practice does remove some transparency of the cost from the negotiated components. And it is commonplace. We see that organizations will often agree to these rates or fixing certain components to reduce that administrative burden. But best practices does include documenting it in the agreement and documenting the methodologies employed by the district for saying, yes, we agree that this is how we got to comfort that this was a reasonable rate or that this was a reasonable amount to fix this contract at. And so the recommendation here was for, if in the cases where fixed components or negotiated components might come about, that the district insert contract language or a formal amendment to specify which portions are fixed, and also to conduct a pre-audit or a review or a comparison of prior project costs or something to really support that there was a reasonableness assessment that was performed by the district prior to agreeing to fixing those components or those rates. And management's action plans, I believe from discussions that we have, they're intending to change that process a little bit to include legal and procurement during the contract negotiation to make sure that those things happen going forward. On page 16, it's observation number 3, which is related to the Rfq Selection Committee, and noted that the process that it was being used did not require diversity, and that one of our samples that we tested included 5 folks on the committee, with 3 of them from facilities development and programming and 2 from maintenance services, so heavily stacked towards that facilities and maintenance side, without representation from some other key project stakeholders from business services, school development, administration, or technology. We did also note that in one of our other samples, for M&M High School, it did contain members from SEP, maintenance, business, and technology. So just one of our samples included the heavily stacked towards facility development and maintenance services. And really, the observation recommendation here was to, even though it is very important to have representation from facility development and maintenance on the Rfq Selection Committee, it's also important to have a diverse group of people from different stakeholder groups like business services and technology. And so our recommendation there was to modify the procedure slightly to either just include some more diversity there. We did note that I believe it was during our field work that procurement was already in the process of implementing a new procedure to really drive more diversity and more input and participation from different departments to identify people to add to the selection committee so that they can get a more diverse committee. And their response on bottom of page 16 and on to page 17 explains some of that new process that they've implemented, and that they're also indicating that in several of their more recent procurements, they've had more diversity in their selection committees. So page 18 starts the process improvement opportunities. Process improvement opportunity number 1 relates to the program management and project management software. Again, we kind of mentioned this earlier, but the district currently uses manual processes and hard copies for everything from pay applications to change orders, and we do note that manual nature of certain things does increase certain risks like undetected errors or missing documentation, untimely documentation, and things like that. And considering the size of the upcoming projects that the district has planned in the next several years, we really believe that a project management software system would greatly benefit the department and the district to increase efficiency and provide some more advanced capabilities in the terms of data analysis and workflows. And so there are several software solutions out there, and we're just recommending that the district consider adding that, because we really feel like it would be a great addition to the control structure, and it can also increase the control structure because you can force certain workflows to happen where something can't get missed, or where supporting documentation is always maintained in the exact same format in the exact same spot, and it's easy for anybody to access. And process improvement opportunity number 2 is on page 19 and relates to the vendor monitoring. Again, we saw that the district had a great vendor monitoring program in place, and that the Facility Development and Programming Group was performing these vendor monitoring, vendor assessments at the end of each project, but we just didn't see where that tied all the way through back to the selection of vendors for procurement. And so we were just recommending that those two things close the loop and marry together to provide the district with the opportunity to use past performance of certain vendors in the selection of vendors for the next project. And this specifically relates to the vendors for use on smaller projects, which are under the $2 or $4 million cap, since those are really assigned on a rotational basis. So that is the conclusion of the report. I'm happy now to answer any questions that anybody has.
Ms. Morgan.
First of all, I'd like to compliment you, Matthew. I think this was a terrific, detailed observation of how we do things in facility construction. And I have already commented to Cindy McClung that in the onboarding process, I think we need to do a lot for new school board members when it comes to facility construction and maintenance, because that seems to be where a lot of the questions come up in the process of approving recommendations by the superintendent. So I also have a question for you. For the past several years, members of the public and members of this board have made allegations of waste, fraud, and abuse by management and by staff. Did you, in the process of doing this report, find any evidence of lax controls or poor management oversight?
Anything that we would have noted that would have related to that would have certainly been included in the report here. As we talked to the process owners and management, we did feel that there was a great controlled structure in place to prevent those sorts of things. And so, like I said, anything that we would have noted would have been included in this report. And nothing jumps out to me as something egregious or something that is cause for great concern.
That was something I was not aware of, and I think that's something we really need to have a serious conversation about. And then finally, Matthew, sort of in conclusion to your response to my question and just the whole report, when would you recommend that we revisit facility construction with an audit of this nature, based on your observations?
I might defer to Clara. I would, or Jennifer on this one. I think, typically something like this might come up every 3 to 5 years, unless there is something that comes to the attention of somebody that might require a specific targeted internal audit. But typically something like this, would be on a rotation, every 3 to 5 years, unless there is a major change in the department or something like that that might warrant, a quick internal audit.
Your work on this project. Thank you.
I was just going to say, I do agree with Matthew with everything that he said about when to review this again, but also keep in mind that we do need to perform follow-up on these observations, which some have been taken care of this year and some they still need some time, so that the observations in here will be addressed again in the short-term future when follow-up is performed.
Thank you. Board members?
It seems that one of the big observations was not using past vendor performance in our evaluation. Can a member of staff address, is that something, why we haven't done that in the past, and is that something that we're looking to incorporate in the future? Have we already incorporated it? I didn't want you guys to be here and not get a chance to talk, so.
First off, their decision has to be. Now, there's a lot of personalities that can take place in some of these scorings, but I believe Frederick and his team is working with RSM to decide what's the best measure to move forward with. But we do keep scoring, we do keep reporting, and I'll let Frederick speak to the next part.
Yes. And also, just to speak a little bit about the RFQ process, there is a portion on there where we evaluate district projects, so your previous district project experience is submitted and evaluated. And as Scott said, procurement now kind of owns the distribution of these continuing services projects. And as it stated in the observation, RSM has provided us a couple of examples of some best practices in terms of rotational issuing out of projects. That does include evaluating the experience. So we're taking those into consideration, devising a new kind of protocol. And as we issue out our new continuing service project solicitation, which is now, as they've spoken, goes up to the $4 million amount, we'll be implementing this process for the rotational basis. And actually those solicitations come out in January, so it'll be a great time to implement this new process as the new RFQs come out for those continuing service contracts.
Okay, so I guess I'm a little bit unclear. I wasn't aware that the ranking process as is included any kind of evaluation of past performance by vendors, but you're telling me that it does?
Is in the selection of the vendors for the original RFQ. So for the original RFQ for continuous service contracts, that evaluation is in there. It's the, once they're on the contract, the rotational process that the past performance is not considered at this time.
Okay, and that's what you're looking to implement to make things better?
Correct.
Okay. And then I think there's a lack of understanding in the public why we go through the RFQ process instead of the RFP process for major construction projects. And it's required by statute that we go through the RFQ process. But I've always been curious as to how do we negotiate price after the bid has already been awarded to a contractor? And it sounds to me like there was an observation here with regard to making sure that we have more data about what the project should cost going into those negotiations. Am I reading this correctly?
Well, I think what he was concerned about was the cost of construction, your on-site supervision, your project managers, your superintendents for the various companies that we engage. We negotiate an hourly rate for these people because they can bill for that every month. And every burden factor for every company is different. You could have a national company, Company X, that has the best of the best, $150 an hour for an individual. We could have a local small vendor that maybe they're only $80. You get what you pay for, and then that's not to say that the smaller vendor couldn't do as good of a job, but there's different levels here. So I think what Chris and Matthew were trying to get at is when you negotiate these rates, how do you come up with what that, let's say a superintendent, what an average superintendent hourly rate should be when you're doing the cost of construction? And when we met with Chris, I was 5 people in my department, and the tax referendum just got approved, and we started looking at some projects. So we are keeping and tracking that data. It's, I believe it's Schedule A in the contracts we put out when the GMP comes in. We negotiate, we try to get fair and reasonable rates, and I believe we've been pretty successful. I will say that, it's been a pleasure working with RSM. Many times you think going to an auditor's like going to the dentist, but they were fair. They were fair and reasonable, and all of their suggestions were implemented immediately the next day. And in terms of the backup documentation, I just signed one today. For instance, Gateway High School. What used to be 20 pages is now about 150 every month. We added a stamp by the project managers who work for me that states, and they sign, that they have validated that every line item in the monthly pay app has been reviewed. There's supporting paperwork and documentation to support that. Our construction managers, where they would put in a monthly fee for their superintendents, we have a sheet from them on their company letterhead. Joe Smith worked 40 hours at X dollars per hour, so every single line is covered, all the way down to porta potties. If we're paying for porta potties, it can tell you how many of them got cleaned. So, I mean, it's a process, and we understand that, and we're always looking for transparency and doing better, and we've activated everything that they suggest that we use. And in regards to the electronic management component, the district has been looking at several different programs to utilize. Unfortunately, funding hasn't been around, and we were at that point when the half-penny sales tax came in to start implementing it, and obviously COVID hit, and that's kind of changed the way our budget's going to be going forward. So I know that we'll continue to look at that, and maybe sometime in the future we'll visit. Now, don't mistake that there isn't construction project management software being used. All of our vendors use the latest construction management software. It's that transition internally that do we have that software, and we don't. What we would like to do is get a software that we control, we put into the contractor's contract that they must utilize our software, and then electronically it's seamless. They can upload stuff into our system and back and forth, and any management people can create any reports and so forth out of that system, kind of like PeopleSoft, but in a construction phase.
Yeah, I was a little surprised that Trey is still allowing paper anything to occur in any process. I was really surprised to see that. Dr. Atkins, I assume that you're sort of monitoring the paperwork that went from this to this, or the process that went from this to this, and the potential additional need for personnel to support these changes. And then I think my last question might be for Ms. Millay. I recall you talking about changes to the selection committee, and wasn't there some pushback, and I think this was mentioned in here, some pushback from the construction advisory committee, bless you, regarding too many people on the construction or on the selection panel that weren't construction people, and how that could have a potential negative impact on the selection committee?
Thank you. The composition of the selection committee has ranged from 100% construction and facilities staff, and kind of swung to, for example, when we build a new school, we have a significant representation of it from academic services, and particularly in the architectural project. So the district believes that when you're, for example, let's take it away from a school district. If you're building a hospital, you know, the doctors and nurses and the people pushing the gurneys down the hallways should have input into what they want to occur in that facility. So when we are building new schools, we have a higher representation from other departments, IT, academic services, et cetera. The construction and architectural firms did push back on this because they indicated that they didn't understand our lingo. They didn't understand what we were saying. So we took the opportunity to share with them that it was in their best interest to use the lingo that would be understood by the users of their end product. So we've had several collaborative discussions and with the business community on this topic, and they're understanding a little bit more why we would like to increase our participation from outside of construction services, and their interest is to be able to speak directly to the project managers on the evaluation process. So, you know, it's a little bit of give and take, and everyone needs to be represented in the process. So I think that we've had that dialogue with our community.
Great, and then my last comment is for RSM, if I may. So nothing jumped off the page here to me as being particularly concerning. There were no red flags. I didn't hear a direct answer from Mr. Blondell regarding waste, fraud, or abuse. Can I get a direct answer to that, please?
So, I mean, during our procedures, we did not identify any waste, fraud, or abuse.
I'm the partner on the engagement. It's nice to be here. I think that's an important point. Throughout our work as internal auditors, we are always aware of controls, gaps, reconciliations, things that could detect fraud. We look at a sample. So in the work that we did not identify fraud, waste, and abuse. There's always the schemester, collusion, you know, those types of things. But, you know, we didn't see anything here that we haven't seen in our other school districts. I would like to give a plug to Ms. Morgan's point about the automation and the manual nature of some of the processes, as you all have discussed. They have some great checklists in place, but, and I know the funding situation in education right now, you know, we feel it, and we would never make a recommendation for you all to spend money that we didn't think would ultimately provide you a positive return on investment. But no, we did not identify any fraud, waste, and abuse in the testing that we performed.
Great, and then just, you know, going forward, part of this is the relationship between the board and the internal auditor. It was a little excruciating for me to have Mr. Blondell on the telephone reading from a report. This is a report that I've consumed over and over and over again. That felt like sort of an inefficient use of time, and sort of, I don't know why he's on the phone and you guys are here, but it would have been more helpful, more interactive for me to have the person actually giving the presentation in front of me. So
understood. Right now, RSM is at a point with the pandemic that we are leaving it up to our individual employees and respecting their ability to do what they feel comfortable doing for themselves and their families.
Completely understood, and if that were the case, then a video conference might have been better, so
okay,
that I can see him and, you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. Great takeaway.
Not making a choice on his behalf, just giving you that feedback.
Understood. Thank you.
Ms. Gittens.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to everyone. That was a great comment about everybody working together. I'll pull this down for a minute because it's tight. About everybody working together to get this done, and I appreciate that. A couple of questions. On the selection of the contractor, I vaguely remember us having a conversation about that. Maybe it was in a briefing or something, and there was talk about points or something like that for past performance, and the discussion was, I see your head nodding, so I'm not totally crazy, and part of it was if someone is, how that would affect a new vendor not having the same points as a previous. So in other words, if you, can you talk about that for a second?
Yes, I believe that discussion was the RFQ refresh discussion, where we were looking to refresh the RFQ points. And at that point, yes, looking at only a vendor's past experience with on a particular project with the district could have an effect on someone who hasn't done any projects with the district. So, because what score would you give them for that area? Right. But this is more specific to the continuing service contracts, where these are on rotation. So theoretically, we would have a past experience on these vendors once they've done a project on that contract. Okay, you see that difference? So the difference is the continuing service contract, where multiple vendors are already awarded on that contract, and we're rotating, versus a new project RFQ. So we're doing a new project.
Getting on that list.
Correct.
Okay, so there's two different things. Two different things. And then at what point or time factor, or is there something in stone as to when you add someone new? Because if you have 5 that are on there and they keep doing a great job and you just keep rotating and rotating, how do you add someone else into that?
Yes, continuing service contracts are good for 3 years. So right now, we'll be executing a new solicitation for the new contract that's due to start next year.
And are, let's say you have 5 people on it, are they staggered as to when they go off, or are they all at the 3 years? So at 3 years, you do the whole thing over?
We do the whole thing over, and a new selection would happen.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And that selection team would have the ability to select the vendors and how many they feel should be awarded on that contract for the next 3 years.
Okay, and that's then based on our capital plan and what we're looking at for the next 5 to 10 years?
Correct, based on the project workload that they anticipate.
Okay, thank you. And listening to, about the software piece, it seems as I'm looking through this that the software piece kind of touches every part of it, from the selection and of the vendors to the processes that are going on. And I know Ms. Morgan asked the superintendent about looking into it, and considering the cost, it seems like it may be something, if we do, it's so overarching to all of the projects that it might, like you're saying, save us money in the long run and be a return on investment. So I'm hoping that we look at that as well and make it a priority that we need to, if we can save money by animating, creating getting the software to do all of this. I think that it's worth it in the long run. So I don't know if you guys agree with that.
I don't know necessarily that it's going to save the district money, but it's going to make staff and the processes more efficient. Typically, a software to implement something like this is in startup cost is around $350,000, and then usually an annual $50,000 to $60,000 to maintain. There are some programs we looked at that actually can somewhat integrate with PeopleSoft. We can't allow them into our firewall to get into PeopleSoft, but the records can be retrieved, making sure Trey's area is safe so that they can somewhat be integrated. So there are programs that can do it. It really would make electronic filing and district staff more efficient in their daily work.
And while you're there, would it help us on some of these exceptions to audits and all of that as well? Wouldn't it be simpler to kind of keep us in line at point A rather than trying to look at, point
It would
A?
definitely be moving into the 21st century, like many other corporations do.
Right.
I think many of the findings that RSM had provided to us, one was getting copies of subcontractor contracts. We don't carry those contracts. That's with the construction manager. We agreed because other districts that they have seen do that. So we now immediately, upon our closeout walk with them, we immediately get all the subcontracts, we get all the subcontractor licensing. And again, I told you about the pay apps, how we get every single invoice on every monthly pay app. So we implemented everything they did, and I do want you guys to be aware on your major capital projects, 2 million and above, we have an independent audit that occurs on every one of those projects. Matter of fact, I think tomorrow night you approved Lehigh Senior High School final pay. We withheld in retainage over $500,000, and there was a finding for $31,000 to be given back to the district. And we have received a credit change order, a deduct to their contract value for that amount. So every one of your big capital jobs is professionally audited, just to give you some confidence factor that stuff isn't slipping through.
Okay. And the last question has to do with the selection committee that Ms. Millay was talking about. I get the fact of having the project committee with people that are the end users of a building, because they know exactly where things need to be and how it needs to be done. Is that different, though, from selecting the company that's going to do it? Because to me, in other words, once that committee gets together and says we need this and here and this and here and this here, then should it not just be presented to the construction company and say, this is what we need? So give us your, your proposal.
Well, you're never going to really have a proposal until you get what's called the GMP, the Guaranteed Max, and that's once you have drawings and documents that can be advertised out on the street for competitive bidding by subcontractors.
Right, but I guess I'm talking about where there was a discussion, let's say, with the contractors and saying, why are these people that are not contractors choosing?
Well, honestly, I've seen it go back and forth over the 15 years I've been with you. No one is ever going to be happy. In every RFQ, there can only be one winner. So one person's happy and 7 other are miserable. Frederick and his team do a really good job to listen and evaluate. And, we're in one phase now where they didn't want any bias by construction and maintenance having the panels loaded by people that do this every day, 8 hours a day, because there could be biases. So let's open it up, get some academic people in there, some principals. Let's open it up to have a greater committee looking at the material that the people are presenting. And it's been successful. Now, many people are happy with that. Some are not, because now they want the relationships that they have in construction and maintenance to be looking at their program. So it goes back and forth, and they react to this in the marketplace, and you hear it at the Construction Advisory Committee. You're never going to please everyone 100% of the time, but I believe everybody as a team effort between procurement and construction services, I think we come up with some really good things to include all vendors in the process.
And has the end product, do you think, been better in the end for that, for having all of them involved?
I think we have great competition going on now. You've got some really big market players and some small market players, and everyone's got a shot. Matter of fact, one of the vendors who spoke the most about items now currently has 3 contracts engaged that he didn't have when he was speaking. So, and fair, he won those. He did a great presentation to the company, and they deserve it. But, when the time is right, you'll get there. And if you didn't get there, you'll study the tapes and say, Company X did this. Maybe I need to do that too.
And what I guess what I'm saying as well is, in the end, when we have a building, a school or whatever completed, because of the input of the end users, have you seen that we're getting better product in the end, is what I'm saying?
I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Morgan.
Yeah, I just want to respond to Ms. Gitten's last comment, because I remember when we did Bonita High School, and we walked through with the principal, and he had made a number of changes to the basic plan from a security point of view, from an aesthetic point of view, but primarily from a security point of view, that were, I'm sure, had not occurred to any of the architects or the contractors. For example, raising the windows so that there's no line of sight. I mean, that was brand new, and that came from the principal. So I think now the principals recognize the value of being involved in the whole process, and the principals who have done earlier projects can provide a lot of insight to new principals with respect to the kinds of things that they would like to have in their buildings that they haven't had, so.
And I have to agree with that. I went on a tour of Gateway this week, and I'll show you pictures later. But it was very good, and a lot of things Mrs. Watson, the contractors would say, well, Mrs. Watson decided she didn't want this, or she wanted this, or, you know, that type of thing. So that's very true. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Giovanelli?
So there was one of the questions that I had that made me led to this quick question. What was the history of the scoring?
Could you put your microphone a little?
I got it. Okay.
Thank you.
Was the history of the scoring evaluated? That was mentioned earlier. That's what made me ask that. Do you know?
Matthew, was the history of the scoring evaluated as part of the process?
The history of the scoring. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Scoring earlier, was that evaluated, the actual history, prior history?
I do remember one question that Matthew and Chris Gumbas had brought up on our continuing contract scope. We, when construction had it, and it's now moved to procurement, we did rotation so that all those small vendors, it was the request of the board that we include all of our local vendors and rotate that work. And one of Chris and Matthew's questions were, well, if you're doing an HVAC program, do you look at a company who has the best HVAC skills? We hire a construction management firm. Technically, they should have skills for every phase of construction internally. So, no, we don't. But I think Chris and Matthew were looking at, is there a way you can find people that have shown in the past a good history of performance in a specific area, and you may jump the chain, the rotation chain, and give them the next project that comes due, because let's say it's an HVAC. They may not be due for rotation for 2 or 3 sections, but because they're, quote, the preferred in history of doing the work, maybe we automatically give that to them. And then you'll be put right back into that same place where you're jumping the chain. Company X seems to be getting all the work every year. We haven't gotten anything, so it really...
Okay, so I don't think the history was evaluated, though, the scoring history. So I think that was the answer, I guess, right?
Well, I'm just not sure what the question is. The history of
the scoring, was it
evaluated?
Ms. Giovanelli, are you referring to the RFQ scoring, the books, and then
Yeah, what Ms. Patrica brought up earlier was the scoring, and so I was curious because was the history was the history of that, of how the scoring process, was that evaluated at all as being efficient? So.
Matt, I think she may be referring to the procurement's RFQ scoring process and just your analysis of the process for procurement in the evaluation process.
Right. Is that efficient? I think that's really the question.
Ms. Giovanelli, can you speak up, please?
Just making sure that that was efficient and that process. That's all I was asking. And if that was evaluated, really, in your audit. That's the question.
Yeah, Matthew, your evaluation led to the issue about the selection committee.
Right.
So yes, it was evaluated. Okay. I think we were looking too deep into the question, but it was a simple question.
Yeah. And then my other actually question was, so did you allow for opportunity for employee input, or was this strictly only asked administrators during your
So in our walkthroughs, we met with individual employees, but Scott has mentioned several times the different conversations that we've had, with him and how his department runs, and we certainly talked with Frederick, and it wasn't only administrators. It was certainly, part of our process is meeting with the process owners, the folks that actually do the work on a daily basis, to understand how they execute their procedures, their jobs.
Thank you. I think that was it from me. Oh, I do. Something I read. You gave an example of, to procurement from other districts that you referenced their standard operating procedures. What was that? Like, what are we doing different that other districts do? Exactly.
So that was just an example of how to incorporate vendor performance monitoring with the assignment of continuing service contracts. Where the district is currently using just the next on the list methodology, this example SOP provided an example of where past performance is used in that process as opposed to just next on the list.
Thank you.
Mrs. Juvenile, is that it?
I think so.
Thank you. Ms. Patrica?
So the next on the list process seems to completely eliminate any potential personality conflicts. I like this vendor, I don't like that vendor, type of issues. So how do we divorce relationships from vendors without doing the next on the list process? Am I making sense?
Yes. So, and that's where, we were saying it should be documented. There should always be a paper trail as to why a particular vendor was selected. Like in the example that Scott mentioned, if an HVAC contractor has always performed very, very well with HVAC projects, it might make more sense to give that contractor a big HVAC project if that's what's next on the list, as opposed to a contractor that maybe has only done one or two smaller projects for the district and maybe didn't go so well. And so in that case, there would need to be a documentation, which this SOP provides an example for, documentation of why we selected this vendor over that one, so that if anybody were to ask, there is a very clear paper trail as to why vendor A was selected over vendor B, and why that benefits the district as opposed to just the next on the list. Yes, it does increase some of the risk with the total objective nature of next on the list, but I really feel that process will benefit the district in assigning projects to contractors that are best suited for the project.
Understood. The other thing that I remember hearing in that process that you went through, Ms. Millay, with the Construction Advisory Committee was during the downturn, so many of our vendors were they didn't have the work to do, so they can't prove to us exactly what you've just described to Mr. Blundell, which is a history of doing large projects. So how do we keep local vendors engaged with the district and keep local dollars local if we're evaluating based on past major projects done? And I do continue to have significant concerns about the lack of objectivity.
So I think it's a balance. It's not just using one over the other. It's about combining the two to get the best outcome for the district.
So as we engaged with our community, we had several discussions about how we would optimize our processes. We rolled out the new process when we moved to procurement, and then we had the version 2.0, where we went out to the vendor community again, asked for input on how are we doing. We've rolled out a new set of processes. Give us your feedback. So part of the question there was, in the downturn, there was less work that was experienced. The number of points that are allocated for that is not in any way a majority, and the majority of vendors are in the same position, and not just locally, but nationally, there was a downturn. So we did go back, and the vendors had requested, could we extend the period from 7 years to maybe 12 years? And as we looked into that, we found that the statute would not allow for that. There's some very specific language about the number of years of experience that can be used in construction items. Did you come up with the number of points? The percentage?
It's 5 and 12.
Okay. And so we were just checking real quick of what are the number of points for that past experience, and it looks like
12 points for past project experience.
12 points for past project experience. So on a scale of 100 points, that's the number of points that are evaluated for that. So I would again say everyone went through the downturn together. There was just not a lot of building going on during that time, and it is a little bit of a challenge. How do we bring forward one of the flexible ways that we've incorporated our evaluation criteria is we've said, give us your example of what you believe is a similar in size project. So we don't say you have to have a $60 million project, you have to have an $80 million project. We say, here's what we're looking to build. Tell us in the past 5 years, what have you built in similar size? If everyone comes in with a $40 million high amount project and we're looking to build an $80 million, well, we've kind of got a level playing field because everybody's kind of in the same range. So, that is one of the areas we just don't have control over, the market economy and who is building during it. So we're cognizant of it. We are looking to be fair and accurate and inclusive in our scoring process.
Thank you. Ms. Jordan?
I was just going to say, I understand what Ms. Patrica is saying, but I would much rather you have a job to do, and we need to make sure that job gets done, and I would much rather have a person who is an expert on ACs versus a pool constructor. So, I mean, we have to really be realistic when we're looking at that, and then, of course, I don't know how the subcontractors come into play and getting everybody to work, but I know all that also is involved in this. So they do have an opportunity to work with us. Okay, thank you.
So I'll just, if there are no other board comments, Ms. Vaughn?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Fisher. I do have a comment question. First of all, regarding, can you hear me all right? All right. First of all, regarding academic involvement, I'm just getting a lot of weird feedback here. With academic involved, let me take it off. Okay, I was just getting my own echo, sorry. Okay, I'm 100% for academics getting involved, especially since we have a lot of prototype schools, and what better way to learn what's not working in a school or what can be improved. So I'm 100% on board with that. The other thing is I have a question about the software. I think if we can spend, make the investment and then we have a payback on the investment, that is a really good one. My question is, we have a lot of projects that are done in the maintenance area that might be, $500,000 to almost $2 million project. Would that same software be able to digitize from that department as well?
Ms. Vaughn, I can tell you that if it was determined that that software would be appropriate for the maintenance function, which is slightly different than mine, but there's many similarities.
Right.
I believe it could be utilized for their benefit as well and integrated in with PeopleSoft.
Okay, yeah, and that would be just really adding to the value if it's something that can be used in, for any of their construction projects that are, the $500,000 up to $2 million projects. That it might just be a much better investment to be able to use it in two different areas, is my point. Maybe RSM, do you know, it can be used in two different departments?
Certainly, some of the softwares can provide some project management capabilities. I don't recall specifically what maintenance uses for their work order tracking, or if there's a different system that they might use for larger projects as opposed to individual work orders. But project management is, in general, it's still project management, and I would imagine that most of the project management software that would be useful for construction could also be useful for facilities for some of their larger projects, assuming they don't already have something in place, like a work order system that tracks that information.
Okay, great. That's all I have to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. So then, I'm just going to add that looking at the program and project management software, it appears to me that it's so overarching and covers a detailed project budget and tracking actual expenses, that I think that over time, and you mentioned something about the efficiency that would occur for staff, so that would be, they could do more with less time investment, so that would be a cost saving there. So I think over time there could be a potential significant return on investment, and I think we really, really do, and I agree with some of our other board members who say we really need to take a look at that and consider doing that as soon as we can. I have a question, Scott, for you. At one of the presentations, and we were talking about the GMP, I think you said something about a built-in margin of error, or that there's some little amount that's built into the total project cost that is flexible, or?
Correct. That'd be what we call the contingency. And in the total project cost that I bring to the board, there's actually two contingencies.
Okay.
You have a GMP from the construction manager, which typically has a 2% project contingency. That's for unknown design and issues throughout the course of the construction.
Right.
I also have a 3% in most of my total project cost to you, district use only. And that could support any changes, any late changes in the school designs or program changes and things to be utilized for that, special programs. For instance, when we got in at Gateway High School with the community, there were some plantings that had to occur and things of that nature. That would be where I would use our owner, lead county school district's contingency to support those dollars. If we don't use it, that entire amount comes back. But it's a safety net in there so that we don't have to come back to the board, get a total project cost increase again, but the money is available and can be utilized for any desire that the school board and the superintendent might see appropriate.
Okay, thank you. And then I think my last question probably is for Matt, and that is when we look at the action plan and monitoring the progress of that, so that's the follow-up, is there a timeline connected with that?
Typically, we would wait, based on the estimated completion date, we would wait a few months just to make sure that that process has had time to fully, get into the swing, and before we would come back and test it. So I think 2 of the estimated completion dates have noted that they are completed, and then 1 would be in June of 2021. And so, our follow-up on that, and when we would do that, we would conduct that testing to close out those observations. We would do at the direction of the board.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Clara, did you have something? No, thank you. Okay, so, Attorney Bruno?
Nothing, ma'am, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Superintendent Atkins? Okay. Moving right on in the agenda, and we're almost a few minutes ahead of schedule, the dashboard review. And at this time, I'll turn it back over to Clara.
You can't tell, but I'm smiling underneath the mask every time I come up here. We submit out a biweekly dashboard once our projects are in place. We've had a lot of commentary over the summer with all of you. Thank you very much for your comments and your feedback. We've heard that it's sufficient. We've heard that it's not sufficient. So we went back to the drawing board on what the dashboard, how it should look, the information that we should provide, etc. So what we did was we broke it out. This is a mock dashboard that you all have in your packet. We broke it out by our phases, interviews and walkthroughs, fieldwork and testing, and then reporting. We thought we'd give a kind of a progress, 20% done, 80% done, what our key accomplishments were, and then what our next steps were. So this way, you'll be able to see that movement from the last dashboard to the current dashboard, because you'll see what our next steps are and whether or not we were able to move on them or not.
Thank you. Board members? Okay.
I have a question.
Ms. Jordan?
I know, I was trying to find my notes really quick. So the 80%, is that, I thought the walkthrough and the interviews and all that was it the 25 and the 35? That's why I was trying to find that other paper.
Right, so what we did, we broke it out by our phases, but it doesn't mean that if we're 80% done with our interviews and our walkthroughs, that doesn't mean that we're 80% done with the total project. That means for that phase of the project.
So that phase of the project?
Yes.
Okay, so what are we looking, if we have 4 months for a project, say 3 to 4 months for a project, at 80% being complete, for which phase? So how do we know which phase are we on?
You'll see, each one of these, you have interviews and walkthroughs, you'll see where we are from that perspective for that phase. We have to do our interviews, we have to do our walkthroughs first for us to be able to gain the understanding and then build upon how we're going to execute testing. So then you'll see us go into field work and testing. Again, we'll be able to show where we are from that perspective. What you'll see by the time we get to field work and testing, we should be pretty much complete with interviews and walkthroughs because we need that information to build our field work and the testing.
Okay. But based on what you were just saying right now, we have already done some of that has already been done prior to us even looking at this, because you had to do that in order to come up with the items that we're auditing. So part of that has already been done as far as your interviewing to determine which ones were the ones that we should be auditing.
Right, so our SOW that we'll talk about later is going to have the projects, right? We do have, is pending our estimated timeline from that perspective, because we're trying to get our meeting date set. So once we kick off a project, that's when this comes into place. So once we kick off a project, you're going to be receiving an update on a biweekly basis so you can see where we are with that project, where we are in the process.
I think what she's trying to figure out is from the timeline milestone, that graph that's in the SOW, how can it correlate to the dashboard? I think if I am understanding Ms. Jordan, I believe that's what she's trying to.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So,
In my head.
we start at 0, right? So we're not going to start billing until we kick off a project. Let me get the SOW.
Maybe I can help clarify. So this starts at 0. The work that we did for the risk assessment is extremely high level. Once we get into a project, we start the interview and walkthrough process from ground zero. I think there was a question asked, who did we speak to? We don't just speak to directors, we're speaking to clerks, et cetera. So that process happens kind of simultaneously. We might start our testing and even building our report. Part of the report that we feel very strongly about is to have a robust background section. You can see how complex the construction process was. Hopefully when you were reading through that, you're like, oh, I didn't know that, you had to do X, Y, and Z, and there's some statutes usually involved in there. So as we're doing the interviews and walkthroughs, we're probably starting the report. We're drafting the objectives and approach, we're finalizing things, we're building that background, gathering org charts, financial data, and we're starting the fieldwork and training also. Let's say someone's on vacation from the interviews and walkthrough that we can't we're not going to stop. We're going to continue, we're going to test, we're going to change, and move through that way. So we don't finish phase 1 and move to phase 2 and then finish. It happens simultaneously. Does that help, Ms. Jordan, with your question?
Well, yes, but I still understand that we paid you for a service to do the risk assessment, which still would have contained a lot of that information because of the fact that we decided that we should, HR, which I'm not really sure still to this day why, what the risk is for HR, the risk factor on that, but in just the information that you gathered prior should, what happened to that information?
It's still there, and we're building upon it, but we're narrowing in on our scope, our objectives, and our understanding of that process as we go down and drill further into the audit. So for example, I know how many employees you have, I know very high level what platform you use to hire. I haven't met those people who do it. I haven't seen the process with that's part of the walkthrough and interview process, that we will go that much further and that much deeper.
Okay. Thank you.
Board members, any other questions or comments regarding the dashboard? Ms. Gittens?
I know I stepped out, so if you've answered this, you don't have to. How does this that we presented today, does this differ from the one that we received before?
Yes, the ones you received before were higher level, so these will be broken down by project into this level of detail.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have more to add?
No, ma'am. And we can change it as we're going along. If we still find it's not sufficient, we can go back to the drawing board again, too.
So then this sample is indicative of what's going to happen for each individual project now as you move down the list in the audit?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, then at this time, next on the agenda is the Audit Committee.
So, Madam Chair and board members, I just want you to know this is not the subcommittee that was created to look into. This is RSM's perspective in terms of their history and their expertise in dealing with audit committees, and I thought that would be a good help to the board.
Yes, thank you very much. Do we want to take a 5-minute break, board members? Yes, please. Yeah, do you mind?
Okay, that's fine.
I took mine.
Do you guys need access to the restroom?
Okay. Oh, we need to talk just one out here, right?
Yes, there is one there, yes, okay. Okay, it's 10:40, and we'll resume with our Audit Committee presentation. Clara.
Real quick, we're just going to give an update on the dashboard. We were having discussion during the break. We're going to mock it up a little bit more into the phases that match the SOW. So there's more clarity and there's more direct relationship between the two.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, next we have audit committees. So Jennifer and I have been working with audit committees for a long time. We've seen a variety of how they're made up, how they're, the composition, those kinds of things, what works, what doesn't work. So what we decided to do is just put together a high-level summary of audit committees, some of the best practices that we've seen. There's a lot of guidance out there as well. The IIA has guidance on public sector audit committees as well. So we just thought we'd just put together some high-level information for you. So page 3 talks about why create an audit committee. Practical way to structure and manage the board's work like any of your other committees. Sometimes a smaller group can be more focused and efficient in dealing with issues. Committee is created to provide counseling and advice for the board or to handle a task on the board's agenda. Stimulate participation and engagement from citizens. The primary role is to advise the board and provide insight to the school board from a citizen's perspective. Interrelationship between the citizenry and the school board intended to be representative and responsive to the communities they serve. Next up on the purpose is to advise the board and provide insight, structured systematic oversight of an organization's governance, risk management, and internal control practices, focus on audit activities, performs its role by providing independent oversight to the school board, monitors, reviews the effectiveness of the organization's internal audit function. The benefits of an audit committee: we have expertise and experience, increased transparency, risk mitigation, and it elevates your audit function. So from a structure perspective, best practice is 3 to 8 members. We have seen a variety of composition. Board appointees, we have seen where it's just the board. 3 members of the board make up the audit committee. What we try to recommend is you want to have people on the board, if they're going to be appointees, the acumen of a function, business, those kinds of things, the financial aspects. They should collectively possess sufficient knowledge of audit, finance, and specific industry knowledge, IT, governance, risk controls. Again, you can appoint a committee member. Typically, the superintendent, the CFO, and the board attorney are ex officio members of the audit committee. They're non-voting. When it comes to your board chair, we've seen it where the school board chair acts as the audit committee chair, or the charter states that the audit committee can vote on who the chair can be. When it's appointees, the appointee, their longevity typically depends on the board members, how long the board members are on the board as well. So we've seen a lot of times where we've had audit committee members that have stayed on through various member changes. You know, each board member has this, they'll do their interviews. They still, this one particular audit committee chair we've worked with for over 15 years, he has transitioned maybe 4 board members, but he still stayed on the audit committee. Your audit committee needs to be governed by a charter that is going to lay the groundwork of the governance perspective that they're going to be providing. Who can serve? Potential candidates, again, board members, residents, experienced business persons, members of district advisory committees or councils. Who should not be on your audit committee? District employees, vendors or service providers, non-board members with close or immediate family members who are district employees or service providers. So this was just a very high-level overview as you all are going through your audit committee discussion and what you want to do.
Great, thank you. So then, board members, questions or comments regarding the audit committee? Mrs. Morgan.
Would you explain to me a little bit about the charter? What is an audit committee charter? And does that specify who's qualified to sit on the committee? What exactly is the?
Correct. So your charter, your audit committee charter is going to define what you all agree upon to establish for your audit committee makeup. So that's going to be your policy, I should say, big picture over that committee and what their purpose is.
Is this something in statute? Is that why you refer to it as a charter?
No, it's a best practice, and it's the terminology when it comes to audit committees and internal audit.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know that.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions regarding the audit committee? Ms. Patrica.
I thought that an audit committee was a good idea from the beginning. I think, and I'm not sure a board member should sit on the committee. Do you have situations where the board member is the liaison, a non-voting member?
Yep, we had that scenario as well.
I think that we could probably set it up the way we set up all of our other advisory committees, which is we have a non-voting board liaison, and then we can each appoint a member. I do get a little bit concerned about the political nature of these appointments by board members, and so I'd like to see the charter. I tried to get this done with our other advisory committees, have the charter lay out some really strict qualifications for the people. Like you said, we need a high degree of business and financial acumen. And so when you say an IT guy, you don't mean the guy that's installing the computers at the company. You mean the guy that's in charge of finance at an IT company.
That is correct.
People who are financially very astute in the various sectors of business. Right?
That is correct.
So I'd like to see, and who's responsible for creating that charter? Would it be Attorney Dupree-Bruno, or would she do that in conjunction with you?
Probably do that in conjunction with us.
And would that be a policy we would adopt?
Mm-hmm. So in my research in some of the districts that do have it, they have it within their policy.
You mean the specific qualifications, or is it referred to by reference, incorporated by reference?
Some of them have incorporated by reference, some of them are more specific than others, so it will really depend on how the board wants to do it. They can have a general policy that refers to a charter, or they can put the terms of the charter in the policy, so it just depends from what I've seen in other districts.
Right, and you know, I think that when it comes to our other committees, I think we're pretty lax. I think we just, you know, accept the recommendation of our colleagues, but I'd like to challenge the board to sort of hold each other accountable on this one, because this is an expensive function. The internal audit function is expensive. We're going to approve a statement of work later on today that's, how much is it, bottom line? $150,000-ish.
Yes.
And really, this committee is going to be advising us on how that money should be spent and what the next project of the internal auditor should be. So I commit to you guys to holding each other accountable, making sure that we're actually appointing people to these committees that have the qualifications to be on this specific committee. Am I making sense?
Yes, Ms. Morgan?
Yeah, it's just, the charter then is everything.
Correct.
Right.
So, and we start with a document that is drafted by Attorney Dupree-Bruno, and we go from there. And I think she
You're
knows.
absolutely right. The charter is very, very important, and it will evolve over time. It also could include such things as attendance.
Yep.
Unfortunately, we've been to several audit committee meetings where we have a challenge getting a quorum, and then there's no way to get somebody off of the committee. You all live that world. It also can give guidance on who, what body, what person can request and approve an audit through that charter. So it's very important what authorization they have, the audit universe, and that's typically the entity that does the evaluation. You can also use them for your external audit function as well.
Great, thank you, Ms. Gittens.
I'm thinking, especially since Ms. Patrica mentioned the fact that we already have our advisory boards and kind of following that, and in addition to what we're already doing, then can we make that, and this may be Ms. Attorney Dupree-Bruno, can we make an addendum to add to our existing advisory board policy, and under that one have all of the information like the charter and everything else, as opposed to a totally different policy, because it's all kind of linked together?
I think that the audit committee will be a little bit different, and it'll be a little bit more specific, and it has a different responsibility than as the advisory committee, depending on what responsibilities that you want the audit committee to do. For example, in the slide, it talked about focus on audit activities. So is this committee going to be one that provides recommendations to the board as to what needs to be audited? I think this committee is just going to be a little bit more intensive in its work and responsibilities than the regular board advisory committees. So my recommendation would be that we have a separate policy for this committee.
Well, how does that, for example, isn't that what ISOC does as well? Is oversight?
They're doing the tax. This one, in my view, based on the districts that are using it, I believe has more of a
hands-on,
thank you, hands-on role with regard to the internal audit process and responsibilities. Again, that will be dictated by your charter.
And then I think this question is for you guys. So this committee would basically meet once you have, at what point in a project? You know, initially to find out what it is, and maybe, you know, halfway through, depending on the dashboard. Can we kind of link those two together and say at this point, and add that to the charter?
So typically, what we try to do is set the audit committee meetings quarterly. And sometimes they're a little off, right? We try to stay away from testing periods. The summer gets very challenging. Sometimes there's budget challenges that interrupt, but 4 meetings a year. And then we actually revolve our schedule so that we can deliver audit reports on those audit committee meetings. So it really does bring a lot of formality to the function that I know the board is craving. And once those dates are set, believe me, we can go backwards. We know the district needs 2 weeks with the report. We know you need to get it a week early. We know how long it takes to do X, Y, and Z. So we try to make sure that we have delivery of an audit at the audit committee meetings quarterly, as well as we will utilize that same dashboard to report updates to them.
Thank you. And then I guess this is, thank you, for the board looking at examples of other districts. How many, I know that's a part of the charter, but how many are we looking at having?
Attorney Bruno, do you want to weigh in?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Ms. Gittens. Can you restate it? How
Ms.
many?
Patrica mentioned about, you know, on other advisory boards, we all present someone, you know, an individual to do it, and to kind of self-police ourselves to make sure we have the right people. So are we agreeing that it's 7?
So 7 representatives chosen by board members? Is that the proposal?
Well, that's what I'm asking, is that, so then, and you mentioned the superintendent, the finance person, and who else did you say?
The board attorney.
And the attorney, and then 7, so that gives 10. Okay.
And you should probably have a board member as a liaison as well.
We already decided on that.
So is there a consensus from the board, at least that will help me out in starting the charter? Are we going to have board members choose 7 individuals with the appropriate qualifications one board liaison, and then the superintendent, CFO, and board attorney.
Okay, and then that's an even number, is that,
Well, it'll only be 7 voting members.
pardon me?
There would only be
It's only
7
7
voting
voting
members.
members.
Okay,
Right.
thank you. Ms. Patrica?
I would just like some guidance on the application process. I don't think it should be just a general, throw it out there like we do with the other advisory committees. I think it should be pointed questions to get to the level of financial experience that the applicant has so that we can determine who should be on this committee.
We have one, it's a county, one client that brings forth those nominations and the whole board approves them. Sounds like what you're referring to.
Well, I'm talking about reaching out to the community to get people to serve.
Right,
What
right.
application process are we going to use for that? Right now, we send out our applications for other board advisory committees, and they're more general, more pointed questions.
So, Ms. Patrica, what I can do is kind of reach out to some of my counterparts that do have the audit committee and get samples of any applications that they have and present it to the board. Or maybe perhaps provide you a sample that I create, and then the board can see if this is enough information that you need to be able to pick the right person.
And Ms. Fisher?
Yes, ma'am.
And I would like to make sure, I understand what you're saying about, getting the right person and having the application process, but I think we should start, large by putting that application out, because there may be someone that we don't know of that may be interested and is qualified, as opposed to selecting and asking different, people. I think we should start broad and then work our way down, because we still will be able to look at the applications and decide if those people are qualified according to the charter.
So, if I may, it was my understanding that Attorney Bruno and RSM would work together to set the groundwork, and that the application process is part of that. So I understand what you're saying, but I think that the selection would be made by board members out of the applicants once we were at that point.
Right.
Is that correct?
And that's what I was saying, but I would want to have it broad in the beginning, as opposed to, well, we're only going to give it to these people. We get a list of whatever. I think it should be out there publicly, and then we still narrow it down based on the application. But, and my last part of that is, when are you planning on starting your next project? In other words, what kind of timeline are we looking at for doing this piece?
When you say this piece, you're talking about the audit committee charter?
Yes.
We can start working with Ms. Bruno now on that. But as far as the timeline, we'll talk about that during the SOW period.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Jordan?
And I'm seriously not trying to be negative, but I feel that, and I appreciate you all bringing this information to us, but I just feel that there's like a conflict of interest. If RSM is working with the board attorney to figure out what it is that we're going to be judging or guiding us on what their work is supposed to be, their scope of work. How does that, I don't know if anyone else is bothered by that, but I am.
Can you clarify that?
Yes, okay. So if I'm the person that you're going to be looking at to see if I'm doing my work, but I'm telling you what I need you to look at, I may not be telling you what you need to know to look at.
I think I hear what you're saying. Can I try to? So,
I think it's a conflict.
the charter will essentially lay the foundation and the guardrails for the creation and membership of the audit committee. If the audit committee is going to be advising RSM and essentially authorizing their work, then is it objective for them to have a say in the creation of those guardrails and that foundation?
Right.
I'm sure Attorney Dupree-Bruno can create the charter on our own, working with other districts and other board attorneys.
We'll provide other examples to Attorney Bruno. We're not going to set the standard. We're just going to provide her, there's guidance out there by the Institute of Internal Auditors on what audit committee charters should look like, the makeup. And we're going to provide her examples of what some of our other school districts and counties and cities do from that perspective. We will not be setting those guidelines.
Well, thank you. And I have to say, it's not just from, this is things that I have heard back from other auditors and people that I do trust and rely on, because this is what they do. And they said the same thing to me. It's like, how is that not a conflict? And it's like, I agree. To me, it is a conflict. So I just have to put that out there, how I feel about that. And I know that you had made mention that you would be sending the information to this committee. I don't know if that means they get that before we get that. I still think that we still need to be involved.
Ms. Jordan, so let me tell you what I'm thinking in terms of the process. I'll reach out to some of my counterparts. I've already gotten some samples, and I'll reach out to get additional samples and whatever RSM can forward. I'll draft a document, and this will come before the board. The board has to approve the charter. It's not going to be created without board approval. And then you guys will make whatever changes you want to make to it, and we'll provide another draft if we need to. And then at that point, think of the charter as bylaws with our instructions on how to create it, who can be on it, what the responsibilities are. And at that point, I think that hopefully you'll be more comfortable in terms of the process that is created for this audit committee. Make sense?
Thank you, Attorney Bruno. And I just want to interject that Attorney Bruno and RSM are the employees of the board. So, we direct what we're looking for and approve whatever they submit as a proposal. Mm-hmm. And now, Ms. Gittens.
Well, to me, if anything, having the advisory board is just another oversight of what they're doing. So in other words, they are going in, RSM is going in and saying, this department, and here's our recommendations for whatever. The advisory board then gets to look at that, which is really another way of overseeing what they're doing. So it's not like they are, getting carte blanche to do whatever. This is just another set of eyes, or however many, 7 sets of eyes to look at and to make sure that everything is in alignment.
Thank you. And I just reviewed the purpose of the audit committee, and I think that they were very specific. Yes. In illustrating that. So
I'm still saying I'm still putting that out there because that's how I feel.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other board member comments? Okay, so then
Yes, I do.
Oh, Ms. Vaughn, please, thank you.
Yeah. I don't have any problem with conflict of interest on this. One of the things that I was wondering about is, can we not have, can we not do something a little bit different from the way that we do our regular advisory committees? Why can't we have people who are interested in being on this committee fill out applications, and then as a board, each of us, let's say, hopefully, we have 11 applicants for 7 positions, and we each send to Ms. Dupree-Bruno our top 7, and we rank them that way. And I think that would bypass the whole idea that, well, this board member only selected, John Doe because she has a business relationship, or, well, okay, that would be a conflict. But you know what I'm saying? That it would be a different way to do this. And if Ms. Patrica had, which I think is a legitimate concern, that it might become political, who selects whom, this would be all of us together selecting. I mean, is that a possibility?
Suggestion, and Attorney Bruno, do you want to comment on that?
So I would have to think of a process to present to the board on how to do that. We probably would have a workshop perhaps with various resumes and applications where the board can take a look at it and then do a board vote on all 7 members. But let me work this through my mind a little bit and figure out what would be a good process if that's the board's desire.
Thank you. So then at this time, are you looking for consensus for you to go ahead and proceed?
I think I need a consensus on 2 items. The first is it going to be 7 members voted on by the board with the 3 ex officio members as well as the board liaison? And then in terms of the process, do you want to have a process where all of the members of this committee are voted together by the board versus individual board members making a nomination?
Okay, so we'll start with the first one. Are we all in agreement that we will have 7 voting members, 3 ex officio, and a board liaison? And so, thumbs up. And Ms. Vaughn, can you weigh in?
Thumbs up.
Thank you. Okay, so that's unanimous. And then the second is on the process. And do we want to divide that up? It's either, are you going to come up with the process, or are we going to determine?
I'll come up. The general idea is either you're going to individually nominate someone for the board, or what Ms. Vaughn suggested was we get a group of individuals and then the board together votes on its 7 members versus individual board members.
Okay, and Ms. Gittens?
So with the group of individuals, though, we would still each be presenting someone, or are we saying to put it out there to get applications back in and as a whole look at those 7? Because there's 2 different ways of doing that. And I think it's more fair to the second way, that we put the information out there to see who is interested and capable and of doing it, and then we narrow that down to the 7 that we need, and we as a board then decide if that's okay.
Okay, so those in favor of individual nominations, please raise your thumb. Ms. Juvenile, do you have a comment?
In that process, I was just thinking, would there be maybe an alternate? Because there's always an issue, and they would need to have a quorum, and there's always an issue with someone not being in attendance. So I don't know if somebody wants to, if an alternate.
So
we're talking 4 meetings.
So I would say this, that part of the process that Ms. Bruno will come back to us with will indicate quarterly meetings and then the means of attendance. I have noted that in some of our other advisories, we've had improved attendance because of our ability to meet virtually. So that could be part of the proposal that she brings forward. So then I think that the first part is that we will just each individually nominate someone. The second option is that we would vote up the application process, put the applications out there. When we get hopefully more than 7 submissions, we will all review them, rank order them, and then return them to Attorney Bruno. So, yes,
But
Ms.
that does
Jordan.
not mean that we do not have the right to go out and speak to people to get them on, to get them in that
apply.
group. Yeah.
Right, but they would have to have meet certain criteria and be able to complete the application. Yes,
May I say something?
yes, please, Ms. Vaughn.
Okay, and obviously, you know, I prefer the second way, but that doesn't exclude us as board members from people that we know that we feel are qualified going out and saying, hey, we have this committee and I think you'd be very qualified to do it. Here's the link for the application. That's why I think it's really the best of 2 worlds, because we can still talk to people in our communities that we know would be, maybe not interested, but That's, as a matter of fact, I think it behooves us to do that because I know I still have 2 unfilled for our advisory because there are no more applicants. So it really behooves us to go out and look for some people as well to fill out the applications. But still vote as a group. If that all makes sense.
Thank you. Any other comments, board members? Okay, so then those in favor of option 1, just individual nominations, raise your thumbs. Okay, and those in favor of option 2? Yes?
Option 2 for Vaughn.
Option 2 is unanimous.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay. So then at that, I think it is 11:11 and we are finished with our morning presentation with RSM and we thank you. And we will be back with you this afternoon for statement of work at 1 p.m. Thank you. And then next on our agenda is our board agenda review for tomorrow night, October 6th. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Adkins.
I think that is for the afternoon as well.
Go to the order, isn't it?
Yes, just go to the order.
Just go to the order. That's this afternoon. Agenda review.
Agenda reviews this afternoon.
Oh, because I checked it.
Give it to you. Does she?
Yeah, that's what it says. It's on here. Okay. Okay, then I guess we'll do the agenda review this afternoon at 1 o'clock. Or after 1 o'clock. Okay.
Who's this guy?
All right, so then, anything for good of the order? Board members, I'll start with Mrs. Giovanelli.
I have none. I can wait till this afternoon, maybe.
Ms. Patrica? Ms. Jordan?
No, thank you.
Ms. Gittens?
No, thank you.
And Mrs. Morgan? And Ms. Vaughn?
Nothing.
Okay, then we'll resume at 1 p.m. and this...
She's gone.
Superintendent Atkins, I'm sorry.
Just, I don't know exactly where to go with this question, and maybe I can bring it up this afternoon, but the issue of resolutions has come up.
Yes.
You should call Betsy back. She'll want to be part of this conversation.
Yes, and I guess we were going
Yeah,
to do
we
that as
should.
part of the agenda review. And so, since my sheet indicated we were doing that now, I said now, but I guess we're doing that this afternoon following the statement of work. So,
It was
Okay.
part of the agenda review questions that I had as well, so, yes.
right, but yes, so we're doing the agenda review then this afternoon.
Okay. that's
Okay,
fine.
thank you. And this meeting is adjourned.